go ahead and get started. So as we talk about this, I just want to go over kind of some of our objectives today. We'll learn about our school-based mental health professionals and what they can provide in SBM services in schools. We'll also talk about a little bit about restricted services and that definition and our definition for counseling. We'll also talk about key requirements for parents' rights and consent, the rules governing confidentiality and exclusions to confidentiality, and what constitutes an educational record and what information can be shared with others. What is school-based mental health? So the reason why I talk about this is just because we all kind of have a different understanding of what school-based mental health is and what, what that role is, what we look at it, what we viewpoint. And so just to know that USBE's focus is services to promote student support, overall wellness, and social, emotional, and behavioral health to help them achieve academic and social success. We also prioritize it as a school safety framework, and we also we approach it as one of the 9 of the school safety framework. And legislators have also, been able to provide us with some legislative funding to help us promote this work in school-based mental health. And it's advanced quite a bit to help us increase that collaboration, improve resources, and build that capacity within every LEA. So who are considered SBMA professionals in schools? So some of those are, a variety of professionals. These include our school counselors, school social workers, school psychologists. These are all licensed by USBE, but this also includes our school nurses that are licensed by DOPL, and they are an integral part of our multidisciplinary team. We also consider those mental health professionals that are licensed by DOPL. And as you know, like some of us have both licenses from both places, right? From USBE and DOPL. Okay, so we're just going to go over some of the key requirements for school-based mental health services. So one of these is LEAs must provide training to educators on parent consent requirements and ensure employee compliance. Utah Code requires that prior written consent happens before administrating any psychological, psychiatric examination, test, or treatment, or any survey revealing personal information about the student or family, what we call, our protected topics. And waiting to contact a parent would put the student or another person at immediate risk. We do not have to get consent if we know that that student's an immediate risk. The other thing is, these are the 2 new rules that were updated is our 53G, 901, and 902 has all of those restricted services requirements. Okay, and then our other major one is underneath FERPA. Parents have access to all of that information in an educational record, and our health records and our mental health records are considered part of that educational record. Okay, so what are restricted services? So hopefully you guys don't have this memorized like I do, but I have it memorized by heart. I joke around with people that I should just get a tattoo of what restricted services means. It'll say restricted services means, a mental health service that takes place in a school setting, and USBE clarified that in Board Rule R27313 that it is the practice of mental health therapy. So we are going to go over kind of the difference of those definitions. I'm going to turn it over to Bethany to start.
So really quick, I've had people question me like, what is Utah Code when you say Utah Code, or what is Board Rule? So Utah Code is law. It's what our legislature puts in code saying this is the law that we're going to follow. And then the Board Rule, so USBE, when we talk about Board Rule R2771313, that's the rule that's attached to the law. So Board Rule is also considered law. It does come through the Board of Education, and it complies with what the Utah Code is. So we kind of use those words interchangeably, Board Rule, Utah Code. They are both things that have to be followed with schools. And so we do interchange those a lot. Just be aware that they are both laws. The Board Rule comes from the Board of Education in compliance with what the Utah law is. So HB 281, that's what we've all heard about this year. That's been a big one with our mental health and our counseling and defining those. So the law said something, and then the board went along and said, okay, we're going to further explain what that law is, and this is what we'll follow as board rule. So part of that with what Tara Kay was just talking about, we have board rule definitions for counseling and for mental health therapy. So counseling is a method used by school counselors, school social workers, and school psychologists to assist individuals and groups in learning how to solve problems, develop coping strategies, and make decisions about personal health, social, emotional, behavioral, educational, vocational, financial, and other interpersonal concerns. So that was defined in board rule recently. And then Tara Kay is going to talk about mental health therapy.
This definition hasn't changed. This definition is in code. It's been there for a while. So our 5860-102 talks about a lot about who can provide mental health therapy, and then it gives us our definition. So just to kind of highlight, this really does, our definition for mental health therapy does focus on, we've gotten a lot of questions about, well, what interventions, are considered mental health therapy. And I really just advise people to go back to this definition. That last bullet point really focuses in on that: engaging in contact of professional intervention, including psychotherapy, by the application of established methods and procedures, generally recognized in the profession of mental health therapy. So that is kind of broad, right? But it is anything that is a generalized method. And I know we often use the term modality and things like that. And so, and we do know that our counselors might use, we all might use some therapeutic strategies in practice, but we're not doing, we're not conducting a professional intervention where we are addressing their mental health disorder through, those established evidence-based methods. So I just like to specify that, as you're talking to your schools and LEAs and you have questions about, well, what is considered mental health therapy and what isn't, you really just need to make sure it aligns with what is in code. Okay, so we're going to move on to kind of talk about who can provide these restricted services. So in HB 281, it was very clear about only authorized personnel are permitted to provide those restricted services, and they list them out. And we've gotten a lot of questions. I know that school psychologists and school social workers were listed in there, but that really means those that are dual licensed. So if you only hold a school psychology or school social work license, but you have not been trained in mental health, or you have not been licensed by DOPL going through that accredited program, then you are not considered authorized personnel. Because USBE licensure is for that educator's licensure. It's not necessarily that mental health professional license that you would get through DOPL. Authorized personnel are those either employed, contracted, or formally agreed upon. Why is this important? This line is probably very important to our community agencies and outside providers, because it means that any of those people also with their mental health professional license that are employed or contracted or have a formal agreement upon need to be following all the requirements that are listed out in HB 281. So this also, I talked about the dual licensure, and then I just want to highlight that both of these people, whether you are employed or contracted, if you're working in that school setting or you're employed or contracted by the school, you are governed by the laws of educators regarding confidentiality, as well as FERPA and HIPAA and Utah State statute and board rule. So we understand why we get so many questions, right? There's a lot of different laws that you have to pay attention to. As well as, I feel like, our code of ethics, right? So I love this graphic because it kind of helps explain all of that. Me and Bethany, what we were talking about, kind of divides those services and what that looks like and who's qualified to provide each service.
So we really wanted to highlight school-based mental health. I have had questions, are school counselors considered school-based mental health providers? Yes, we are. We are under that umbrella. We provide counseling services along with school social workers and school psychologists. We do that short-term solution-focused counseling. We provide classroom instruction. We do skill building. We do crisis prevention and support. We do not do mental health therapy. So I do, and this is where I've gotten a lot of questions. I do have several, not a lot, but several school counselors who are also clinical mental health counselors. So your CMHCs. As we go through this presentation, we really want to highlight that the role you are hired for is the role that you should be functioning within. I do have some CMHCs who are also working part-time as a school counselor, and they're doing half and half. Bless you. You do need to have those two separate consents where you're doing the therapy and then you're doing the parental consent for school counseling. So that's one of those. I just really want to highlight school counselors. Yes, you are a part of that team. Again, so school social workers, school psychologists, but we are not therapists. I think there's some confusion with parents in the field about what maybe therapy is versus what counseling is, and that's why we really want to define that. That's why we want to have the roles and responsibilities defined in that. And then the therapists or the DOPL licensed mental health professionals that can provide that mental health therapy. So I saw a question in the chat. Tara K, did you see that one? Sorry,
Yeah,
things are popping up as I'm talking.
yeah, and we want to answer all of your questions. We'll try to get them as we pop up. So do you want me to read this one to you, Bethany?
No, we can yeah, go ahead and read that to me.
Okay. So Tyson, thanks for asking. Should high school counselors get permission for counseling forms signed by students if they are talking about things that are outside of college and career readiness?
So generally, we get parent permission for school counseling services. That is done at the beginning of the year. And your school counseling permission form, and most LEAs, I've been looking, people are emailing me all summer, have fabulous forms, and it's written out the prohibited topics and getting parent permission. But it's always, always, always best practice to get parent permission, to let parents be aware of what we're talking about. So I'm hoping that you are getting that parent permission at the beginning of the school year regarding school counseling services, and that should include CCR, but it also includes the social emotional if you're talking about that. If you're going to include students in groups, skills groups, and that type of thing as well. So yes, the answer to that would be yes. We want to get parent permission, and if you need help or if you need some examples, I'm happy to share those out. I've been doing that all summer as well. So any questions on this, on the differences between mental health services and therapy versus counseling services? Are we good to go ahead and move on?
I'm going to answer this other question, and I'm just going to add to what you said, Bethany, just about especially if it's a protected topic that a student's bringing up, we need to get permission to talk about that topic with them. So Erickson, he asked, what do we mean by short term? And I've gotten this question a lot, and how I explain it is, if any of you have been involved in goal setting or IEP settings and things like that, counseling should be, directed towards progress, right? So when we say short term, we mean that we shouldn't just be seeing a student for no reason, right? There should be a goal in mind. There should be an idea of what skills we're working on and how are we meeting those things. So short term means, and in code, it says short-term solution-focused goals, right? So what are those solution-focused goals that you're working on with that student, and are you achieving them? And then are there other goals that you're adding and working on, right? Because we know that sometimes students have multiple things that we need to work through, but we also need to recognize that there are students that shouldn't need long-term support. There's students that might need longer-term support, but you should be evolving those short-term solution-focused goals as you go along. And I hope that helps kind of clarify that. I'm going to actually, Samantha, I'm going to go on to this next slide and then answer your question, because this next slide kind of goes into that a little bit. So we're going to talk about what are the restricted services requirements. So our restricted services requirements, and are really, you know, there's a long list of them, but this is really what is required in that consent form, and what is required in code. So I'm going to just go over these briefly. And just remember that these is only for mental health therapy. It's not our counseling, what should go on our counseling form or what goes into our counseling requirements. So when obtaining consent, we do need to give parents the opportunity to identify topics or issues to address or not address. And if we have our model consent form that we sent out and we kind of just leave that option, right? We're leaving kind of a space for that. Or you need to be asking that in your, when you're going through that consent form with parents, for you can write those down, whether it's on the consent form or not, but you need to give them that opportunity. That doesn't necessarily have to be on your consent form, but we recommend you put it there just for there's a record of what those topics are. And that's for, you know, just to have clear, explicit communication with that parent and yourself. Okay, and then consent is generally required before the initial session of each school year. And there are some exclusions that got brought out in HB 281 that talks about crisis situations, and some other safety exclusions concerning suicide prevention, and also, you know, our mandatory reporting requirements. So, and yeah, we'll add, we do have a model consent form and we can put it in the chat for you guys. It is on the SVMH resource page as well. So this is where we kind of talk about an IEP. So in HB 281, there's a section that is a little bit confusing that talks about an IEP, right? And it says an IEP or Section 504 plan can satisfy the consent requirement for mental health therapy restricted services if the IEP has those services outlined in it. Okay. This is the only section that also talks about that you can conduct those mental health services in front of other students. Because this is the only kind of exception, then the other services, that's why we talk about that in mental health therapy, we are conducting individual mental health therapy. That is what is approved through HB 281. This is kind of the exception that you can do it in front of other services, students. And to me, what this means is like, if you're pulling a kid out to work on coping skills, or if you're going into the classroom and you're working on something, you know, with their plan, or a conflict resolution plan, or you know, part of the reinforcement that you guys worked on, are we going in and talking about intensive trauma and processing some emotions in the middle of the class in front of other students? I would say best practice is no, but it doesn't explicitly explain that in code. But we've talked about that this, you know, this exclusion doesn't necessarily mean that it would be appropriate or best practice to be doing certain mental health therapies in front of other students or staff. But it does kind of allow you to make sure that you can do those push-in services if you are working on certain things within the classroom or part of that student's plan to help them learn certain strategies and to help them with their mental health. So going back to the question in the chat to Samantha, if the student is an IEP, do we need permission? So if they're outlined mental health services in the IEP, no, you don't need permission. Our recommendation in our guidance document is that you still get permission for an IEP. Just because in an IEP, it might not give you the opportunity to identify topics or issues to address or not to address. So there's certain things that were put in code for requirement, and we want to make sure that we can address those things that may not have came up in the IEP. So we still recommend that you maybe meet with that parent and maybe get an additional consent form revolving around your services, but no, it's not mandated by code. I'm gonna go on to just this parent notification. So it is required after each session, unless the parents opt out. So on your consent form, you can put that the parent opts out, that the service took place and the topics discussed. Okay, so what this means is that we are notifying them within 1 business day that that service took place and what the topics were discussed, okay? That doesn't mean that we necessarily have to share specific information that the student shared with us, but we are talking about our goals, we're talking about the topics of the goals that we're addressing, and that we're also, you know, letting them know when we visited with them. And, you know, best practice, I believe, in this situation is that you're asking parents what form of communication you want. So in code, it did not tell us if we have to do a phone call or an email. Okay, that is up to you. That is up to your LEA about what system you're using to help notify them that they were serviced. And also maybe a discussion with the parent of what's better for them. Okay, if it's a phone call or an email. So that's something that the legislator left open to the discretion of the LEA and the provider. Authorized personnel may not address a topic or issue with a student when a parent and guardian has expressly stated not to address that topic. Okay, there are certain exclusions that apply, which have to do with safety and suicide and mandatory reporting. Okay, if you suspect that there might be an issue surrounding this topic, we're only asking questions that's going to help us make a mandatory report. Okay, we're not delving into that topic or issue or giving any giving them our opinions or thoughts about that topic or issue. And also, I suggest that those topics or issues that are listed on the form, you ask the parent, what would you like me to do when that topic or issue comes up in therapy? You know, do you want to be notified? You know, you also have to think about, is that notification going to put the student at risk in the home? Do you want me to, you know, address this with your student and let them know that that's not, you know, a topic and issue we discussed, and just having that open communication with the parent of what they would like to see happen in those situations, I think will help you build that stronger relationship with the parent and help this not be an issue. So there is that standardized consent form that needs to happen with these things on it with restricted services. And thank you, Holly. Holly is also in recommendation, as we are, that for 504s or IEPs, that we get that parent consent signed. Okay, so we are going to move on to when are groups allowed and when are they not allowed? So this is a question that we've gotten a lot of discussion on, and what kind of revolves around this. And so basically what me and Bethany kind of already explained to you guys earlier is just that counseling groups are allowed. Okay, under the counseling definition, we have things like skill building, solution focused counseling, supporting groups, support groups and crisis support, working on students' interpersonal skills, behavior, emotional regulation, education. What is not allowed, that whether you're in the school setting, you're hired or contracted, or outside the school setting, but the LEA is contracting or has a formal agreement, we are not to be performing group mental health therapy. Okay, it should only be individual mental health therapy. So as we move on, Bethany kind of already talked about this slide a little bit with dual licensed professionals, but I'm going to go over maybe just a few more important things. So as we talk about this, your role should be defined by the LEA. We should adhere to that scope of practice. Just be cognizant that when you are doing that individual therapy, you know, that's when we're kind of pulling on those intensive, you know, therapeutic modalities that are more evidence-based and more commonplace. We're using those more in that setting rather versus in counseling. We're maybe using a skill-based curriculum that might be based on a therapeutic strategy, but we need to make sure that they're skill-based and not going into that treatment area. Also, using 2 different consent forms, I think, is very helpful to parents, especially if we have, you know, some practitioners that are at a charter school and you are kind of doing some tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 services. And so that will help us be very clear that these are our counseling services where we're working on skill building, And this is when I'm meeting individually with a student to work on their mental health disorder. Bethany, I am going to, can you go through the chat and see which maybe ones I need to answer and you need to answer about this?
So Tara K, I've been responding. We had a question about if grief group, and then we talked about if it's skills and you're teaching skills on how to deal with grief, then that would be okay. If you're doing therapy with grief, then grief therapy, then no. So again, going back to what Tara K just said, it depends on if you're teaching skills and you're doing that educational piece, that is okay. If you're doing the therapy piece, then no, we can't be doing that in group. And also, depending on what your role or your license is, obviously you should or should not be doing the therapy. So, Tara K, we just lost your presentation.
I am aware. I'm actually just
Okay.
pulling up.
I say your presentation because Tara K has it. I guess I could throw it up on my screen too.
I've got it back up. My computer loves to do this thing when I'm presenting where it likes to, it likes to freeze right in the middle of my presentation. So it came back up for me though. So I'm going to click on it right now.
So Jordan, you asked about your local mental health agency. Yes, in the beginning we addressed this and we have recorded it so you can watch it later, but they do need to follow the same rules. They're not able to do, so therapists from the local mental health agency aren't able to do group therapy. They are able to meet with the students, but they have to follow the same laws, education laws, FERPA laws, board rule, and Utah code that are for school-based mental health. So even though they may not be based in the school, they do need to follow those same rules. So I'll encourage you to watch the rest of the presentation later. Okay.
Okay, so Bethany, we're just going to go over this this one slide. Are you seeing the note slide or the other one?
I'm seeing key differences between counseling and mental health, and then I assume it's going to bring up each bullet point.
Yep. So I will click through this for you.
So the first thing that we talk about when we talk about these differences is, I believe it's access. Oh, scope. So counseling services are broader, aiming to equip all students with essential life skills to address life challenges. We often say it's universal for school counseling, and we'll talk a little bit more about the different tiers with the multi-tiered systems of support. Mental health therapy is more focused on providing assessment, diagnosis, and treatment of mental health disorders. And then the approach, counseling services are proactive and preventative. We want to foster a supportive environment, whereas mental health therapy is more often reactive, addressing existing mental health concerns. And then the integration, counseling services are embedded in daily school activities and lessons, while mental health therapy is usually provided by mental health professionals through a referral pathway.
So we have a few questions in the chat, and I'm going to kind of go over that as we go over the systems of support. So in our systems of support, it kind of goes over like our intensive community mental health treatment. You know, some of those services are being provided within the school. We kind of have that cross collaboration. And so we kind of talk about, we kind of talked about those interventions and how, mental health, it can be integrated in all levels of the MTSS framework, and students may fluctuate between needing less intensive to more intensive supports. Both school and community partners should collaborate to provide mental health support in tandem to ensure timely and appropriate care for all students. So going into some of your guys' questions revolving school counselors and that grief crisis support. And so we do have a curriculum that Kathy Davis has been working on with the University of Utah that is for educators to be trained on that grief and crisis support. And that training specifically, is evidence-based, but it is not, intensive therapeutic in nature, and it can be provided by counseling support staff and others that have been trained in that grief and support group. So you really, like I said, going back and looking at those definitions, you need to look at your curriculum that you're providing for those grief crisis support. And then as far as school counselors, like if they are therapeutic in nature, then no, school counselors should not. If they are a specific therapeutic modality, processing intensive, trauma or a mental health disorder, then school counselors shouldn't be conducting those. But like I said, it's dependent on that curriculum. We do have one here at USBE that Kathy and the prevention team have been training on that partner with USBE. And then our other question talking about, some in a crisis, screening with the GAD-7 and the PHQ-9. I'm gonna save that, Vicki, to the end if that's okay. We can get into that a little bit farther. All right, so we're gonna move on to kind of what Tier 1 universal supports look like. I'm gonna turn that back over to Bethany.
Okay, so Tier 1, like I said earlier, is universal support. In the roles and responsibilities document, it specifically lists that school counseling is a Tier 1. As school counselors, we do work with Tier 2 and Tier 3 as far as referral, but this is kind of where we live. Those of you that are also doing the classroom elementary level are mostly living in Tier 1, which is that prevention, promotion, and universal supports for all students. So there's some different highlights we wanted to talk about. Helping in Tier 1, we want to improve equitable access to services, academic achievement, and opportunities for all of our students. We want to develop prevention programs and do in-service trainings related to classroom management techniques, trauma-informed care, suicide warning signs, parent seminars, which we have throughout the state for those as well. So we want to help with that. In Tier 1, we're also collaborating on our school climate. We're talking about behavior, safety, and mental health data in order to develop positive behavior and school safety plans. Also in Tier 1, we're assessing with families, teachers, administrators, and community partners to promote our student wellness. And then we also want to refer students after universal health screenings to evidence-based supports and to be assessed for mental health concerns through a school-based mental health therapist or community mental health partners. So Tier 1, again, is available for all students. We provide whole classroom instruction, specifically for school counselors. That can be through your LEA curriculum. We also have the Portrait of a Graduate that many across the state have used to kind of do those classroom lessons to help teach all of our students interpersonal, behavioral, and emotional regulation skills, as well as part of our Utah K-12 Comprehensive School Counseling Program model.
So I'm gonna talk a little bit more about our targeted support. These are students that we've identified having additional needs, and we are going to tailor a little bit more of our interventions specific to what those needs are. So this could look like, responsive services through behavior, or we're having some safety issues, any sort of reintegration plans from returning to learn, or being out for a little bit and coming back. What do we need to put in place to help the student be more successful? We're going to develop those strategies and help that student promote their well-being. We're going to collaborate with parents and outside facilities of whatever community resources that family might need, or the resources they're already getting. We're going to hopefully collaborate with those partners to find out what they're working on with them and how we can support that at school. We are going to assess any of those barriers to their learning, or including social and emotional, and identify, possible, this is where maybe we are going to implement an assessment to see what those mental health concerns are. Okay, and then we want to make sure that we are referring those students that are identified for any, behavior or truancy to our services within the school and outside in the community. And we want to help provide solution-focused group counseling to those that need additional support, working on those coping skills, problem solving, and those interpersonal skills. Okay, so our target 3 intensive support, these are students with more individualized needs that maybe being in a group or being in, they might need things ramped up for a time period to help address certain issues. And so these are very similar to tier 2, but we are going to make them a little bit more intensive and definitely individualize specific needs that the student needs. So help support students with those concerns and provide those wraparound services. We're going to develop kind of any sort of those safety plans or reintegration plans as we're moving students back in from intensive medical or mental health treatment center. We're going to help collaborate within our team of who can provide the best services and also the most appropriate services. So sometimes I know as we move on from this, we're going to talk about kind of all the roles and different services that we provide and kind of leveraging our unique strengths and background. And we're going to assess the behavioral needs of students, work on, conducting any threat assessments, developing those behavior plans. And like I said, at this time or in any time in the, continuum of these services, we're going to refer out to students that might need mental health support within the community or within our agency. And just provide those individualized solution-focused counseling to address those student needs. So just to kind of highlight that our whole point of this roles and responsibility document is really to kind of emphasize to LEAs that we want to integrate our systems of care within our community systems of care. And how can we best do that? We have some resources that help us kind of integrate that. Looking at our different agencies and our communities, they vary. Our state is very varied from the north to the south and what's available to us, and how can we best utilize those resources that are available to us. That is really kind of, for me, the main point of highlighting that MTSS framework is how can we really provide the students with the best care possible with the limited resources that sometimes we have in this area. And I'm going to kind of turn it back over to Bethany to kind of talk about what are some other supports we can put in place for students that maybe aren't provided by a school counselor or school social worker.
So we do have other supports, and I just wanted to go along with Tara Kay. This looks different in every LEA. As we talk about the different roles and supports, you'll need to really see what resources are available within your LEA, within your community, and then working with your team. We also want to really highlight collaborating on this with your roles and responsibilities. You may be the only school-based mental health provider in your school. You may come from a school that has, 10 school counselors and 3 social workers and, all sorts of other things. So it really kind of depends on what's available to you. And we just want you to recognize the resources that you have, but also to advocate for the roles that you have. And if you're the only one, we applaud you and thank you for all the great things that you do, because that can be really hard. Other supports, we do have teaching that we can do, teaching and implementing basic stress management, check and connect is across the state, working with your mental health, local mental health authority, mental health promotion and resources, implementing behavior interventions, checking in, check out, lots of suicide prevention across the state. We have 988, we have MCOT, we have Hope Squad, Sources of Strength, other suicide prevention supports there. Crisis support, so emotional support until appropriate personnel arrive. That a lot of times that's when a student is in crisis. And then other supports are de-escalation strategies and or emotional supports during a behavioral or emotional crisis. So we really want to highlight advocating for what you do. You are professionals. We appreciate the work that you do. And so we'll talk about what should provide or who should provide which service within each tier. You want to go ahead with that, Tara Kay? So Tanya already did an it depends in one of the responses in the chat. So it depends again on what the resources are available within you, who is available at your school, who the providers are, if you have school social workers, if you have school psychologists, if you have school counselors, which you should. But the answer is it depends on within those each tier. So this form that we have, the roles and responsibilities, is fabulous, but it is not black and white. It's, you know, the end all be all. It depends on what resources you have within those tiers. Different LEAs also have different needs, so I like that that's brought up. And USBE does have some resources that are on the school-based mental health. I know Tanya threw those in the chat as well to help answer the question. Tara Kay can talk a little bit about this. I realize we have 10 minutes, so we will record this, but please feel free to reach out. We'll keep going on this. We may not get to everything we want to get to today, but Tara Kay, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, so I just want to highlight that in a perfect world, right, we would have enough funding to provide more resources. And that's why, you know, our roles and responsibility document is really developed to kind of help give you that structure of what each individual should, you know, can provide, and then how they should provide that is within your own districts and their needs and their community needs. And one tool to use for that is our behavioral health toolkit. We use this toolkit as not a starting from scratch. It's about determining a systematic way to implement the services and supports that are needed within your community. So each community is different, and it's about being a part of your community and addressing these concerns through, you know, culture, data, collaboration, and sustainability. And these are the 4 things that are built into every step of the toolkit. And so we really recommend we have some online webinar videos for each step of the toolkit and how you can better, you know, assess the need or grow on that need of your established frameworks within that. So we are just going to go over quickly kind of our overlapping roles and each person's roles within the school system as our SBMH provider. So I'm going to turn this back over to Bethany.
So biggest thing, again, we do have overlapping roles at times, is collaboration. Make sure you're collaborating, that you're meeting regularly, you're analyzing data to identify your student needs depending on your roles, so that we're using our roles to the best professional abilities and not providing dual or triple services because they're going to the school counselor and then they're going and meeting with the social worker and then they're like really identifying the needs of students and then supporting those needs through the different roles that we have. So all of these roles implement, monitor, and evaluate multi-tiered programs and practices. We all advocate for policies and procedures that promote a positive school climate. We all advocate for our students and their families at student-focused meetings. And so as you're going through this roles and responsibilities document, really look at those different roles and how you can support each other, collaborate. We're not here to be like, I'm the school counselor, these are my kids, school social worker, you don't get to talk to them, or vice versa. We all have our professional, amazing things that we do, and so we just really want to focus on that teamwork. School counselors, school nurses, school psychologists, school social workers, and school-based mental health therapists can work collaboratively by leveraging your unique strengths and focusing on shared goals. So we'll go ahead and talk about some of these different roles. School counselors, we do have in Utah the comprehensive K through 12 school counseling program model. We have our board rules that highlight. We really focus on providing academic as well as social emotional supports for our students and families. We assist in developing coping skills, managing emotions, resolving conflict resolution. We provide classroom lessons as well as short-term counseling. And so we work with our entire student body. We do have some Utah laws that are required that we meet with 7th through 12th graders and provide college and career readiness plans for each of those students individually as well as group. And so those are kind of the unique things that school counselors do. Next, we have our school nurses. I think school nurses are next.
Yep.
While we have Kendra on, Kendra, do you want to speak to this one?
Sure. So I wasn't expecting to do this, but I'll keep it brief because we're running out of time. So school nurses, they provide holistic care, which also includes mental health, because you can't treat physical health without treating the entire child or student. But we do provide direct care for emergent and episodes of mental health and crisis. We collaborate with families, school communities, and mental health teams. We conduct comprehensive health assessments, which also includes mental health screenings, and we develop and implement health education programs. Sometimes we're providing QPR, we're providing some of those mental health trainings for the community.
Thanks, Kendra.
All right, so our school psychologists, I know sometimes we like to put them in this SPED box, and we, kind of want to break them out of that SPED box because they do have some unique strengths of helping us, with collecting and analyzing data for those evaluations, as well as, managing, programs and helping with psychological services and counseling for all students in developing those positive behavior plans. School psychologists really, I feel like, add to a unique multidisciplinary team to helping us know some of what those requirements are for evaluation, but also helping us, with that consultation and collaboration with families, getting those kind of systems in place to make sure that we are addressing all of those needs or recognizing some of those signs that we need to recognize before we can assess students. And then as we go into that school social work role, I am not biased. I'm slightly biased, right? But as a school social worker, I just want to say my favorite thing about being a school social worker was being a part of a multidisciplinary team. I was over multiple schools, and I really relied on my school counselors and other members of the team to help me, fill me in on what was going on with that student, help me get that more holistic approach of how we were addressing needs with that student and how I could best support in my specific services, and how me and the school counselor, the school psychologist, or the OT, or whatever service providers that student needed, how we could collaborate together to make our efforts more targeted and giving them that wraparound services. We are trained in more of that systems framework, that kind of macro micro practice. And one of the things that I loved about my role is really being able to bridge that gap between home and community, and assisting parents in those services within the community to help, to help decrease those barriers that they were seeing and some of the needs that we were seeing in the school setting. So school-based mental health therapists also have a very important role in our school and community. And people might not realize that there's lots of individuals that are trained in mental health therapy, and this is the list of any DOPL licensed individuals that can provide that mental health therapy. They're trained in those therapeutic intensive treatments and also helping that student process those emotions and the trauma using those therapeutic modalities, and also helping us to assess those needs. And in schools, there's a lot of behaviors that we see that come from those mental health concerns, from anxiety and oppositional defiance disorder, and some of these things that we see those behaviors, and teachers and educators need a lot of support in helping address those appropriately. And our school-based mental health therapists, whether they're in the community or in our school, is a really valuable part of our team to address those. So as we're wrapping up, we just want to focus on, what are the strategies to help us enhance that collaboration? And that is having regular communication with our teams, defining what everybody's roles and responsibilities are, so we're not having as much overlap, and also, having joint professional development helps build us as a team, also being aware of what others are trained on and can do. And collaborating on that individual case management for those wraparound services, and sharing all those resources. And my favorite is team building activities. I had a school, they always invited me to play volleyball, and that was my favorite thing. And it really helped us, be more a part of a team. So by focusing on these strategies, we can create a more cohesive and effective support system for students. Students benefit from this collaboration, improved academic performance, increased attendance, reduced behavior issues, and helping create those stronger family and community engagements. So in conclusion, our whole point of today is that integrating SVMH into MTSS systems, along with encouraging collaborating among SVMH staff, families, and community partners, leads to a more comprehensive support and safer environment for all students. We so appreciate all of you attending today, and I appreciate your time. We are always here for questions, me and Bethany. I have open office hours. You can find a link on the website. You can also email me with any additional questions that we may have not gotten to today. I'm going to turn it back over to Bethany if she wants to say any last words, and turn it back over to Tanya.
Thank you again, all of you, for all that you do for students across Utah. You really make a difference. I appreciate collaborating. It's been so fun to collaborate with Tara Kay and Chris-Ann through this process of HB 281, and I really appreciate hearing from our people out in the field. So thank you so much for what you do. Tara Kay and I are happy to stay on and answer questions. If you need to go, totally go, and we will share this recording, but we're also happy to answer any questions if we have those still. Thank you.
And thanks to Bethany and Tara Kay for this great information. We really appreciate them joining us today. Just a quick reminder, our prevention webinar series happens on the third Thursday of every month from 12 to 1. So we hope that you'll join us in coming months. Next month's webinar will be held on September 18th and focused on suicide prevention. If you feel like you have a colleague or other people who might benefit from the information that we share on these webinars, please feel free to share the information and have them register. And just a quick reminder as well, we will be posting the recording of this training and future webinars on the prevention website and prevention YouTube channel at USBE. Thank you so much for being here today. That concludes our webinar, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.